About 8,000 Cuban doctors are leaving Brazil.
Welcome to Plain English, the podcast that goes at the right speed for English language learners. Listen now and read the transcript online at plainenglish.com. Now, here's Jeff, your host for today's episode.
When you think of Cuba's exports, you might think sugar or tobacco, but in fact, its biggest export is healthcare. But the Cuban healthcare industry will take a hit after 8,000 of its doctors are being withdrawn from Brazil. Hi again, welcome to Plain English. I'm Jeff. JR is the producer, and you are listening to the best podcast for learning English through current events. Today is Thursday, December 6th, 2018, and this is episode 109. That means you can find the transcript of today's program online at plainenglish.com/109. I'd also like to mention our partner, Você. They have a great pronunciation course that I know you'll like. It's available at plainenglish.com/talk, Talk. It's a great course that has tons of tips and honestly a lot of great pronunciation practice and content. If you're looking to speak better English, you really need to go to plainenglish.com/talk, Talk, and check out the Você pronunciation course. Cuba is withdrawing 8,000 doctors from Brazil after a verbal sparring match with President-elect Jair Bolsonaro. At this point, you might be wondering why Cuba has 8,000 doctors in Brazil to begin with. Cuba actually has a big program called More Doctors, in which it sends 50,000 trained physicians to work in over 60 other countries, most of them developing and in need of medical expertise. Cuba calls them an army of white coats, and it's big business for them. Through this program, healthcare is actually the country's biggest export, meaning Cuba makes more money off its doctors working in other countries than it makes from traditional exports like tobacco, sugar, or even its tourism industry. Brazil alone pays Cuba about $400 to $500 million each year for healthcare services. Many of the Cuban doctors have worked in parts of Brazil that are underserved by the medical community, where the only doctors available in whole towns or neighborhoods are these Cuban doctors. So Cuba sends tens of thousands of doctors to needy countries to administer checkups, deliver babies, cure illnesses, and tend to injuries. What's not to like? Well, plenty. For starters, the host countries, the ones receiving the medical help from Cuban doctors, well, they don't pay the doctors directly. Instead, they pay the Cuban government, and the Cuban government keeps 80% of their wages for itself. Second, the doctors are not allowed to bring their families with them when they go for an assignment in another country. Since many Cubans have historically tried to defect or seek asylum in the United States and Europe when given the chance, the Cuban government doesn't allow them to bring their families along, supposedly to deter them from defecting. One doctor who did manage to defect, though, was a Cuban radiologist who had been working in Venezuela. He is Carlos Hernandez, and he is now living in the United States, helping Cuban doctors defect to the United States. And here's what he had to say about Cuba's More Doctors program. He said the program was a violation of his dignity as a human being and that he was paid just $50 a month. The president-elect of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, sees things similarly. He called this arrangement slave labor. He demanded that the Cuban government let the doctors working in Brazil bring their families, and he insisted that the Cuban government let the doctors keep more of what they earn for their services. He also wanted them to be trained and certified to practice medicine in Brazil. Well, unsurprisingly, these conditions were unacceptable to the Cuban government, which promptly recalled the 8,000 doctors currently working in Brazil. What at first seemed like a win for Bolsonaro's agenda and a win for human rights might easily have turned to disaster, since Bolsonaro didn't appear to have a backup plan to fill those 8,000 jobs in over 2,800 towns. But after a massive recruitment effort, the government said within days that it had already filled 97% of the vacancies that will result from the Cuban doctors leaving. Even so, it's not clear whether all 8,000 are willing to work in the dangerous urban areas or the remote villages that Cuban doctors once served. Even with these particular jobs filled, there is still a shortage of medical expertise in Brazil, and the shortage is particularly acute in areas far from large cities. There is a legitimate fear that Brazil doesn't have enough trained doctors to take care of its own population, or at least that they don't live in the right places, and that Bolsonaro's war of words with Cuba might actually deprive people in his country of the care that they need. One typical example is the state of Pernambuco. The capital, Recife, has 3/4 of the state's doctors, but less than 20% of the state's population. That means that there are a lot of people in smaller towns and cities that don't have access to the medical care they need without traveling to the capital. As difficult as this will be for Brazil, though, it will be worse for Cuba. While the island nation boasts over 60 client governments for its More Doctors program, the vast majority of those doctors are working in just two countries, Brazil and Venezuela. Venezuela has long been able to pay for its doctors by providing Cuba with cheap oil and loans. Over 21,000 doctors are currently working there. But Venezuela's economy is collapsing, and the amount of oil that's being produced is falling rapidly. So that puts the biggest source of revenue for Cuba's government at serious risk. The Cuban economy has opened up a little bit to tourism, but its relations with the United States and Canada have cooled recently, and the hoped-for tourism boom has not yet materialized. The Cuban economy does not produce a wide enough variety of goods and services to make up for the expected losses from its More Doctors program. If you liked this week's topic, today's topic, then you have a fellow listener to thank. That would be Stefano from the state of Maranhão in Brazil. At first, I wasn't quite sure about this topic. I wasn't sure if I thought it would be interesting, but Stefano wrote me a nice summary of the issue, and it really captured my interest. As Stefano says, it's a complex issue, and there are a lot of people who need the medical care in Brazil. I hope the new recruits the government found can fill the holes left by the departing Cuban doctors. You know, JR and I, we do a lot of the work here at Plain English, so I love it when the listeners chip in a little by suggesting topics and sending me some information. So if there's a big story near where you're living, and if you think it would be interesting to people around the world, send me a note to Jeff, Jeff, at plainenglish.com, and I'd be happy to consider your idea for a future episode. Thanks again to Stefano for this story idea. I also want to take this time to say hi to some people who left comments on the plainenglish.com website. You know, I haven't looked at those very much since the vast majority of the comments are just junk spam comments. You wouldn't believe how many I have to delete. But I noticed there were some from people who left me legitimate comments that I never acknowledged at the time. So this is going back in time a little bit, but hello and thank you to Viridiana from Mexico, Torsten from Germany, who listens on his way to work, Tainan from Brazil, Caio from Brazil, Maurice from Germany, Marcos from Brazil, Irvin from Venezuela, Rodolfo from Ecuador, and finally, my favorite note on the website so far, Grazia from Milan, Italy. Grazia is 76 years old, or 76 years young maybe. She says she reads the transcripts and listens with pleasure. 76 years old. Grazia, thank you so much for listening, and congratulations for being a podcast listener. Well, it's been a while since we've done a pure phrasal verb, but I've got one for you today. And that phrasal verb is make up, specifically to make up for something. To make up for something. What a weird little combination of words. Here's how you heard it in the original context. Cuba's economy does not have enough other exports to make up for the loss in the More Doctors program in Brazil. There are not enough other sources of income to make up for the loss in income from more doctors. Make up for, in this case, means to compensate for or to offset it. So they're losing money with one program, but they can't make more money in another way. They can't make up for it with other subsidies or other income. You want to use this generally. Generally, when something in one area is missing and you fill it in with something from another area. I know that sounds pretty vague, so here are a few more examples. I'm starting a new project at work. Doesn't it seem like I'm always starting a new project at work? You might be wondering if I ever finish them or if I only ever just start them. Anyway, I'm starting a new project, but unfortunately, I'm going to miss the whole first week due to other commitments. Yikes. I'm going to need to make up for this by doing some extra reading, some extra preparation, and talking to my other team members who are going to be there in that first week. So I'm going to be absent. Something's missing. I won't be there for the first week. However, I'm going to try to make this less bad. I'm going to try to make up for this by doing some additional preparation before I officially begin. We just had our big Thanksgiving holiday here in the United States, and one thing we Americans do on Thanksgiving is we eat a lot. Some people drink a lot too, but a lot of people were on diets, and they probably didn't stick to their diets over the long Thanksgiving weekend. They're going to have to make up for that by doing some additional exercise in the coming weeks. So they missed their diet over Thanksgiving, but they're going to even things out. They're going to make up for it by doing some extra exercise the next week. Whenever I was sick and had to miss school as a kid, my teachers gave me additional materials to read and more homework to do to make up for the time I missed in the classroom. One more example. In our midterm elections, the Republicans, Trump's Republicans, they lost a lot of voters in the suburbs of our larger cities. Suburbs tend to be more Republican areas, and the Republicans lost some of those voters in the midterm elections. They were probably hoping that they would gain more voters in rural areas to make up for their loss in the suburbs, but it didn't work out that way. They couldn't make up for losing those suburban votes, and they suffered a big political loss in the congressional elections last month. So that's make up for. Like a lot of phrasal verbs, there are a few other ways to use it, but I wanted to stick with just that one example, that one way of using it in today's episode. I hope you've enjoyed this Thursday edition of Plain English. Remember, we're here every Monday and every Thursday, and you can download the show on Apple Podcasts if you're on an iPhone, or on the Google Podcasts app if you're on Android. Just go to the Google Play Store and download the Google Podcasts app. You can find us easily on Google Podcasts just by searching for our name, Plain English. JR and I will be back with episode number 110 on Monday. That episode will be about the world's first genetically modified baby. Hey, don't run the risk that you might miss an episode. The one on Monday about the gene editing is a good episode. I already wrote it, and I'm about to record it here in a minute, so I can tell you right now it's a good one. And you can guarantee that you'll never miss an episode by signing up to get the Plain English emails. Just go to plainenglish.com/mail, M-A-I-L, enter your details, and you'll get an email for every new episode. The emails have a summary of the episode, links to English articles about the main topic, and one additional English word or phrase. So check that out at plainenglish.com/mail, M-A-I-L. Have a great weekend, and we'll be right back here on Monday.